Welcome to Tales from Flat Space, a podcast of science fiction and fantasy by yours truly, Gina A. Pond. Just know that the stories in this podcast may contain content that could be disturbing to some listeners. Listener discretion is advised. This is Colony, Part 2, Geneva, Chapter 28, Marcus. Just as I got Lulu's message, a sonic boom sounded above the house, shaking the rafters. The kids all started to cry while the adults uselessly held their hands over their ears. "That's our ship! Everyone, outside! Now!" Lena grabbed one of the twins, Yura the other, and Yuna had Nico and his George. Ben carried a bag that Yuna had handed to him and ushered Giannis's parents out the door. Giannis activated the air chair and I went behind him and pushed. "You don't have to," he started to say. "Giannis, don't. Getting you off planet is my job. Let me do it." Right, he said, and I pushed the chair out the door. The stealth demon was sitting in the middle of the field outside the house and looked like a flying saucer out of an old sci-fi movie. The shape was, Marcus had learned, the most efficient known shape for stealth atmospheric entry. There were only a couple in existence, and one usually followed John Smith when he went out into the field. In fact, John Smith was standing at the end of the ramp that led into the ship. The red grass around the ship was flattened. I heard the sound of vehicles under the roar of the demon, and I looked towards the road to see colony police vehicles pulling into the field. Officers were spilling out of the cars with guns. "Hold on," I said to Giannis. Giannis looped his left hand around the arm of the chair, and I pushed it quickly down the porch stairs and over the grass. "Watch your heads! The ship is hot!" John yelled. "Hurry!" I looked up. The edges of the saucer were still glowing bright red with the heat from entry. I ducked as I pushed Giannis's chair under it and onto the ship. A Musashi officer came and took the chair from me. I led him and stopped in front of John. "I counted 10, Marcus. Where are the others?" he yelled over the noise of the ship. "Kai's in the woods. Lulu went after him. She distracted the Leos." John nodded, then waved me up the ramp. I obeyed, and he followed, tapping his wristcom. "Go, before they start shooting!" The ramp began to close, and there was a sound of metal pinging against metal. I ran up the last few steps and dropped to the floor. John did the same, then yelled into his wristcom, "Send out the pickets! Target the guns, but don't hurt anyone!" The ramp closed behind us, and suddenly there was a ringing quiet. All I could hear was our breathing. John stood up and straightened out his suit jacket. He turned to the nearest wall, palmed a panel, and said, "Show me the outside view." All the officers with guns suddenly dropped them as the pickets cut the muzzles of the guns in half. John tapped his wristcom again. "Can we engage stealth mode?" he asked. "No, sir. We're still too hot from entry. We won't really cool off until we reach space." John frowned. "Send the pickets through their vehicles, too. Make sure to hit the comms. Hopefully it'll delay them a bit." "Too late, sir. Jets are already en route." "Damn," he said. "All right, Yi. Give them a good chase so we can get our guests settled, then head straight up." "Yes, sir," Yi replied. John turned off the screen, then turned to me. "Introduce me to our guests?" I nodded and followed John to the medbay. The family were all huddled in medbay, with the doctor and several nurses trying to urge them into gel suits. Nico was crying, clutching his George tightly, and the twins were glued to their mother's legs. It looked like Yuri and Georg were arguing with them, but when John and I entered, the family turned towards me. Everybody, this is my boss, Mr. John Smith. He's head of Survey Intelligence." All the adults went quiet and wide-eyed. "The head of Survey Intelligence?" Georg stammered out. "Why would you be interested in us?" "Your son is an asset to us, but assets can't function properly if their family is in distress," John said. His face became stony. "We do not take kindly to our enemies putting families, and particularly children, in danger." John's wristcom chimed, and he tapped it. "Report. Intercept in approximately 5 minutes. Okay, send out pickets to disable, no permanent damage. Make it so they have enough time to eject." "Yes, sir," you replied. John turned back to the family. The rest of this conversation will need to wait, unfortunately. I need to ask you all to get into your gel suits and into the tanks immediately. We're going to sedate you for the journey, since we'll need to maintain high G for extended periods of time. The kids? Asked Una. John looked at the twins and Nico and said, May I? Holding his hands out for Nico. Una handed him over, and Nico, much to everyone's surprise, immediately stopped crying, clutched at his George, and put his thumb in his mouth. The medbay staff ushered the adults into gel suits, assuring them that the children would be fine, as John got down on the floor, beckoning the twins over, whose curiosity overcame their fear. Hello, Nika. Hello, Mika and Arya. My name is John, and you're now on my special spaceship. Why? Asked Mika. Well, some bad people wanted to hurt you and your family, so we came to make sure that didn't happen. We're going to take you to a safe place. Where? Said the twins. Far away from here, and you'll learn more when we get there. But now we're going to have to make you sleep during the trip because the ship has to go really fast, and that can hurt you if you stay awake. We're going to put you in a special gel that keeps your body safe. And you know what, Nico? The gel is green like George drool. Yeah? Nico asked. Yes, John said. He paused. You know, my pilots and I really need your help, Nico. Yeah? I need to borrow your George. Why do you need his George? Asked Arya. Well, the George gives special powers to spaceship pilots. Their powers help pilots make sure that the kids on their ships are always safe. Grow-ups too? Asked Nico. Grown-ups too, John said. Unfortunately, our pilot lost his George and needs to borrow yours. Nico got a determined look on his face as he shoved his George into John's chest. Yes, I help. No George is bad. My George help. Thank you so much, Nico. My pilots will feel so much better now. Now, you need to let the nurses get you into the special suits. Mika and Arya, this nurse is going to help you into yours, okay? The twins nodded, and the nurse that came up to them took them over to their own gel tank. Now, Nico, I'll stay with you until you fall asleep, okay? Okay, he said. Keep us safe, George, he ordered the plushie, then put his thumb back in his mouth. John smiled at Nico as the nurse quietly came up behind them and handed John an injector. John took it, patted Nico on the back, then injected him quickly with a sedative. Nico closed his eyes and was fast asleep in seconds. The nurse took Nico away to his own tank, and John got up off the floor with the George. Una, now in her suit, came over. Wow, that was incredible. Thank you, Mr. Smith. We protect children, ma'am. Please, it's time to get into your tank, John said. She nodded and went back to the tank she was assigned. John turned to me and handed me the George. Make sure the pilots secure George in the cockpit, Marcus. Really? I asked. Of course. I may not believe in magic, but the children do, and for them it's real. I need to get into my own tank since I don't have the enhancements you or the pilots do. You'll need to eventually get into a tank yourself, since we'll need to do some 10G bursts to get to flat space quickly. What about Lulu and Kai? I asked. We have another smaller demon in orbit. He thought for a moment. Where are they going? The summit of Pisherba, I replied. John nodded. When Lulu has him, they can stay on the top and call for the demon to come get them there. Sheerporn Station won't like it, but it's easier than going all the way through the atmosphere. Right, I said. Get going, John said, and walked quickly out of the medbay. Marcus, Giannis called out. He was still in his chair next to the gel tank. Why aren't you in your tank yet? I asked. I told him to take care of the others first. I sighed, put George down on the side table next to the tank, and picked up Giannis's gel suit. If you don't mind parking your chair, I'll help you. You sure? I smiled. I'm stronger than I look. I've had enhancements. Oh, he said, blushing. Then, sure. He parked the chair, then I helped him strip down to his underwear and put on the gel suit. The tank was already full, and I lowered the tank most of the way to the floor. I pushed down the arm of his chair, pulled his legs over, then came behind him to get the rest of his body in the tank. I hooked up the tubes to the suit, double-checking to make sure that none of them were kinked. "She'll find Kai, right?" Giannis asked. "Jessica's the best, Giannis. She'll find him," I said. "All right, I'm going to put the breather on you and start the sedation, okay?" Giannis nodded, still looking worried. I put on his breather and waited until he fell asleep. I waved one of the nurses over, and they took Giannis's chair to a storage niche and secured it with a series of straps and hooks. When all the adults and kids were asleep in their tanks, I picked up Nico's George and brought him to the bridge. The pilot solemnly strapped the George into a spot near the flight controls when I explained the reason for its presence. The lead pilot turned to me. "You have enhancements, sir?" "Yes," I replied. "Strap in, then. We'll let you know when it's time to get into your tank." I nodded and did as I was told. As I watched the pilots on the bridge, my mind was numb, and the only thought I had was that I was glad to finally be getting off Geneva. Chapter 29. Lulu. I walked up to the farmhouse, which looked a lot like the Zimmerleys' place, and knocked on the door. The person that answered was an older, feminine-looking person who eyed me suspiciously. "Yes?" they asked. "Grüezi, sorry to bother you, but I got lost on my hike, and I feel really stupid, but somehow I lost my wrist comm. Do you have a materials printer? I can pay for it." I gave her one of my most pitiful lost girl looks. The woman frowned. "Well, we don't have a materials printer here, but my daughter is going to Murin for work in a bit, and she can take you to the comms dealer there." "Oh, you're a lifesaver. Thank you so much." Kein Problem," they said. "Come in, then. We're just having breakfast." "Thanks." They opened the door for me, and I entered the kitchen that was nearly identical to the Zimmerleys, down to the breakfast items on the table. They motioned for me to come in and closed the door behind me. "I'm Julia. This is my husband Yannick and our daughter Ava." "I'm Jessica. I was visiting with the Zimmerleys, but decided to go for a hike this morning and got hopelessly lost." "Oh, we could bring you back there if you like." "Well, we were going to take a family trip to Pish Sherbet today, so they probably left already. I told them I'd take the rental car and follow them up, since there wasn't room for me in their car with all the kids." Julia narrowed her eyes, but didn't say anything except, "All right, Ava, can you get a plate and a coffee for Jessica, please?" Ava nodded, got up, and started brewing a coffee for me. I gratefully sat at the table, as Ava put a plate and silverware in front of me. "Help yourself," she said. "If you want muesli, I can get you a bowl." The table was laid out with meats, cheese, bread, croissants, various jams, sausages, and clotted cream. "Oh, no, thank you. What's out is more than enough. This looks wonderful. Is this all from your own farm?" Ava smiled. "The sausages, cheese, and cream are. We don't really do arable crops or have chickens. We get our wheat from the Zimmerleys, though." "You're so lucky. Their wheat is the best I've tasted." I filled my plate and took a bite of croissant. "Oh, this is heavenly." Ava smiled and Julia beamed. I tucked into breakfast. The rest of the family talked about the farm. Most of their chatter went over my head. At one point while I was eating, Yannick looked at me approvingly and said gruffly, "Healthy appetite you got there." I smiled and he blushed. "I only had a nutrition shake before I left this morning. I was hoping to get some pictures of the Sherbhorn this morning while the light was still good." "You're a photographer?" Ava asked. I nodded, chewing on some cheese. I swallowed. "I work for a travel magazine on New York Colony. My husband is a friend of the Zimmerleys, and they offered to let me stay on their farm while I do a spread on Schweiz." "Oh, then you'll definitely want to go to Murin then," said Ava. "It's the most beautiful town of all Schweiz." And Julia grinned. "Oh, no, Schattensberg is nothing to sneeze at." "Oh, Mama, you say that because it reminds you of Lauterbrunnen on Earth. It's not bad, but the view from Murin is incredible." What about the view from the summit?" Oh, that's pretty spectacular, especially since you're technically in space, but you can't see past the clouds. Is this your first time going up? I nodded. Oh, then after we stop at the Riscom store, I'll just bring you to the Summit Hostel. You'll all need to stay there anyway for suit training if you want to go up tomorrow. We'll probably be there after your family gets there, so you can meet up with them at the hostel. True, thanks. I appreciate the help. No problem. When we're done with breakfast, we can head out. I smiled at Ava, who blushed and finished my croissant. It was early afternoon when we reached Murin. The drive seemed mostly flat, but I could feel my ears popping as we drove up the winding road. The readouts in my eyes said that my enhancements were compensating for the elevation. I blinked as I looked out the window to switch to the tracking view and saw that Kai was making quick time and would probably reach Murin first thing in the morning. Ava dropped me off at the Sherba Visitor Center after I got my new Riscom. Have a good time, she said, then drove to wherever it was she worked. I waved goodbye and went to the front desk. Grüezi, welcome to the Sherba. Are you here for the funicular? The clerk said. Yes, I'd like to go up tomorrow morning. Do you have pressure suit certification? They asked. I tapped my Riscom. Unfortunately, Jessica Musterman didn't have a valid EVA certificate. Crap, it ran out. Sorry, you'll still have to take the course, although we do have a short research course in the evenings at 1900. I know it's late, but it's not that long. It's mostly a practical and written test. No lessons. Should only take about an hour. Sure, that's fine. What's the earliest I can go up in the morning? There's a sunrise train at 0800. Perfect, I'll do that. The clerk looked surprised, but booked me for the class trip and a room at the hostel. Here's the key to your room, and the class will be in the lounge. Dinner starts at 1700. I gave them my best dazzle smile, and they blushed. Thank you so much. I grabbed the backpack and went to my room. The hostel had a materials printer, so I bought myself a couple of new outfits and a pair of hiking boots. Not my favorite clothing, but Jessica Musterman was a nature photographer, not a dominatrix. I showered and changed and went downstairs for dinner. There's a buffet of local specialties, and you could order fondue or raclette. I sat at one of the tables and ordered a large fondue. It would go a long way to help my caloric deficit of the last couple of days, though it still wasn't quite enough since the bots were busy keeping my body adjusted to the elevation. I sighed, sipping white wine while I waited for the cheesy goodness. A person came up to my table. Hi, do you mind if we share the table? I looked around in surprise, seeing that there were plenty of empty tables. Her face looked worried, though, and so I said, Sure, have a seat. They sat down. I'm Trina, they said, held out a hand. I took it. Jessica. I watched as she placed her own order, and the waiter brought her a beer. So, who's being a shit to you? I asked bluntly. Trina jumped. No, I mean... I raised my eyebrows. Well, okay. There's this woman. I only dated her for a month. I mean, she was cute and all, but she wanted me to do things I didn't want to do. Then she would yell at me and if I didn't pay attention to her, and it started getting worse. Trina looked like she was about to cry, but was holding it in. We broke up a couple months ago, and I came up here to have a quiet week in Murin, but she followed me. I figured if I sat with you for dinner, maybe she'd get the hint and leave me alone. It was a bad breakup, and I just wanted to clear my head, you know? I get it, I said. Is she here? Trina nodded. She just went over to the buffet, the blonde woman in the blue turtleneck. I flashed her a reassuring smile. Play along, especially when she comes over. What's her name? Okay, Trina said with trepidation. Her name's Leslie. Predictably, Leslie came and sat at a table near ours. I took Trina's hand and projected my best "I'm going to fuck you all night long" look in her direction. Trina blushed, which was adorable, but I kept my eye on the other woman. Leslie frowned and kept watching us out of the corner of her eye. I said, quietly, so Leslie couldn't hear, Try and react as if I'm talking dirty to you. I pitched my voice so it sounded like it too, and Trina blushed harder. Damn, I thought. If the clock wasn't ticking and we didn't have this bitch to deal with... It did the trick, though, and Leslie finally marched over to the table. I let go of Trina's hand gently and turned to the other woman. Can I help you? She ignored me and focused on Trina. I thought you said you were coming here alone. Well, we just met and... Leslie's face clouded. You're my girlfriend. Why are you with her? Trina started, but then I stood up. Leslie was at least 2 heads taller than me. She folded her arms and smirked. What? You're just after a piece of ass. I can tell. Come on, Trina, we're leaving. No, Leslie, please, Trina began. I sighed and put up my hand to stop her. This bitch picked the wrong day. If you'll excuse us, Trina love, I said, let's talk outside. Fine, said Leslie, who stalked out the door. Tell them to keep the fondue warm, would you? I said to Trina and followed the other woman out. The sun was setting and the moons weren't up yet, so it was getting dark around the hostel. I walked over to an area that was darkest and Leslie followed. I blinked on my night vision so I could see the woman clearly. Listen, Leslie, right? Trina told me about you. I'll give you one warning. Back off. She dumped you, so deal. She didn't dump me, she's just confused. Really? She didn't sound confused to me. I saw one of the town security people walking by. Perfect. Lies, I'm sure. I'm the only one who can treat her right. I laughed. So, you thought stalking her was treating her right? I asked loudly, which got the attention of the security guard, who started walking towards us. What do you care? You just met her. You don't know what she's like. I'm the only one who can keep her in line. You can't have her. Leslie sprang at me and I dodged her, and she fell to the ground. Before she could get back up, I grabbed her arm, twisted, and put my knee on her back. I care because I was having a nice dinner with a lovely woman, and here you come barging in like a fucking bull in heat because you can't handle rejection. You're just lucky I'm a little too tired and not at my best. Is there a problem here? Said the security guard. Yes, officer. This woman was stalking my date and just tried to attack me. I believe that's illegal, right? Yes, ma'am. I got off Leslie, then hauled her up bodily to a standing position. The security guard's eyes went wide. The victim is sitting at my table, and I'm sure she'll be willing to give a statement. Right, they said, and called for the victim team. Soon, Leslie was in custody. The security officer took a preliminary statement from me, and one of the victim advocates had me lead them to Trina. Our dinners had come out, and Trina blanched to see the advocate with me. I sat down and started eating while the advocate talked to Trina and took a preliminary statement. Okay, Miss Forrester, I'll let you finish your dinner with your friend. I'd like you to come to the station in the morning so we can file the official report, okay? Can you handle the night alone here, or would you like to stay somewhere else? Trina looked at me, then said, No, I think I'll be okay here. She smiled. The advocate turned to me. Will you be available for a full statement? I'm heading up the mountain first thing in the morning. I'm meeting family. They nodded. Then come to the station when you get back, okay? Yeah, sure, I lied. The advocate left. Trina was quiet for a while, picking at her own dinner, while I polished off the pot of fondue. Thanks, she said. I held up my fondue fork. Nah. Don't say you were too weak to keep her away from you. It took serious balls just to break up with her. Weak as being shitty to people. I speared another hunk of bread and dipped it in the cheese. Now that you know what it's like, you're less likely to let it happen to you again, right? Yeah, but really, thank you. Trina blushed again. I wiped my mouth and put my fork down, took her hand and kissed it. If I didn't have a class to take right now, well, Just believe me that you aren't weak and are worthy of being treated well. I gave her my best smile. Have a good night, Trina. She nodded, and I walked towards the lounge. The class itself felt anticlimactic as I went quickly through the exams. The instructor declared me proficient, and I went back up to my room. I wrote up a statement for the police, set it to send while I was on the funicular, and went to bed. I woke up the next morning early, had breakfast, and arrived at the funicular station an hour early. I blinked my tracking on, and I could see that Kai's dot was moving up the mountain already. Confused, I went to the desk. Excuse me, I thought the 0800 train was the first train of the day. Did I hear another train leave this morning? Well, the clerk nodded. No, you didn't hear wrong. There's a train that goes up at 0600 for residents and staff. Oh, I see. Do you happen to know if a guy named Kai went up with them? He was supposed to meet me here, but he didn't stay at the hostel. Oh, Kai? Yeah. He's a part-time worker, so we let him go on whatever trip he wants. Are you a friend of his? Friend of the family, really. I sighed. Damn. It's okay, ma'am. You'll only be 2 hours behind him. You should be able to catch up with him at the top. Yeah, true. Thanks for your help. I went back to the waiting room. 30 minutes before the train was to leave, all the passengers were ushered into their suits, then into the funicular. I sat in the front car, watching Kai's signal slowly go up the mountain ahead of me. Damn, I wish I had my tablet, I thought. I would have found him last night. My intuition was screaming that something was wrong. My bots only had so much practical range without a tablet, so there had been no way to get an exact location. We were halfway up when my bots started to go into low power mode, since I hadn't eaten enough in the last few days, despite last night's fondue. I could already feel the ache in my muscles from dealing with the woman last night, and swore silently to myself the whole ride up, wishing I could have made the train go faster. When the train finally reached the top, we all got out and were led to the cliff viewpoint. According to the bots, Kai was close. I turned around slowly until I could see his signal more clearly. It looked like he was at the end of a service road that ran from the observation point. The signal wasn't moving, so I broke from the group and made my way down the road. It took me 20 minutes to get to the top of a small hill where I saw a pressure-suited figure leaning against a rock near the cliff edge. I moved forward again and stumbled. I saw the figure stand up and turn towards me. I tried to run to them, but the suit and my depleted bots made it near impossible. I tried to connect my comms to his, since all suits used at Piz Sherba were supposed to be able to connect, but he had turned the comms of his suit off. I kept moving forward, but before I could get any further, he turned away from me, took 2 large steps, and time seemed to slow as the 3rd step took him over the cliff edge. Kai! I shouted in my helmet, uselessly. My ocular map showed his signal falling and picking up speed. Fucking coward! I screamed and went to my knees, not really caring that it would take forever to get back up. I was shaking with fury at Kai, at chaos, and at the fact that I'd have to go back to Sun Tzu and tell his nephew that his Uncle Kai was never coming back. I screamed in frustration, watching helplessly as he fell, the moments feeling like an eternity before his body burned up in the atmosphere. I wasn't sure how long it was that I knelt on the road in rage, wanting to kill something in revenge for a senseless death before my rational mind reasserted itself. I used the last of my power in my bots and the wrist comm to signal the demon I knew was in orbit. The top of Piz Sherba was mostly flat, so I just waited where I was. I slowly focused on getting myself back up into a standing position, and by the time the demon touched down in front of me, I was standing again, with some measure of calm. The airlock of the demon opened, and I slowly climbed inside. Because we were still in gravity, it didn't take as long for it to cycle through once the pilot closed the door, and eventually the inner door opened. "Yo, Lulu," said the pilot. "Come on in." "Mira?" "Yeah, let me help you out of that death trap." Fucking hell, they bring people up here in those things. "It's Unity Tech, Mira. Just get me out of the damn thing." "Yeah, sure," she replied and set to work. Hey, weren't you supposed to have a passenger? John Smith said I was supposed to pick up 2 of you. My anger threatened to come to the surface again. No, Mira, no passenger, I said flatly. Oh, shit. Lulu. Mira gave me a sympathetic look. Just get me out of this fucking suit, I snapped. Mira did as I asked, then handed me a gel suit. When I get this on, just plug me in with a feeding tube and knock me out. My bots are spent. You sure? She asked. I looked at her and she stepped back a bit. Shit, I was about to snap at her again, I thought. It's not her fault. She doesn't deserve it. I took a deep breath. Yes, Mira. Just plug me in and get me off this fucking dirtball. I'm done. She nodded, and when I had the suit on, she carefully helped me into the tank, then got all the connections and breathers sorted, adding a sedative to my feeding tube. When Mira was done and returned to the pilot's seat, I let myself sink into the gel. I floated there, and when sleep overtook me, I surrendered to oblivion. Okay. Part 3. Chaos. Chapter 30. Jenny. The cruiser dropped me off at First Station, and an aide of the first captain ushered me to an empty conference room. I was surprised that I was routed here instead of going directly to Musashi, but the orders were directly from the Admiral. I sat facing the door, the Admiral's sword on the table. I took a moment to breathe while I waited. I am sorry for the delay, Jenny, said the first. The Admiral is still with the negotiating team. He should be joining you in a few minutes. Understood, I said. There was silence for a moment. Then the first said, I never got to thank you for your work on New Harmony. I did what was necessary first, I said. I'm not a hero. To many people you are, especially those on New Harmony, they said. I grimaced at the thought, but only said, I understand first. The door opened then, and the Admiral came in. I always envied his serenity, no matter what situation he was in. I greatly admired him. I knew that he, too, had taken the priestly vows, and as I went through training, I figured he wouldn't be a bad person to emulate. I stood and bowed to him. Hello, Jenny. Please, sit. I did so. Shockingly, he looked thinner than even the last time I saw him, and his skin was ashen brown instead of its usual dark tone. I could feel my eyes widen, though if the Admiral saw my reaction to his appearance, he ignored it. Is your business on New York Colony finished? Well, I'm sure you've heard from Sun Tzu, but yes, I think Lulu and Marcus can continue the investigation without me. Good, because, as you were told, I intend to make you my apprentice. Yes, sir, but, why me? There was a reason I was at your first DAN test, Jenny. I have been watching you and your progress since the New Harmony mission. I heard about your progress during training from your teachers and from Sun Tzu and Musashi. I watched the video of what you accomplished on New Harmony. You completed the mission, despite the fact that you were forced to execute your fiancé and everything else you suffered. You came back, and instead of completely falling apart, you embraced Buddhism and found a way to live with yourself, and what you had done and what was done to you. None of these things would be easy for the average person, but you've not only not fallen apart, you've excelled. You confirmed it for me when I saw you during your DAN test that you were to be the next Admiral. But, sir, I haven't taken any of the other DAN tests, and I never went past Ensign in Unity. He waved his hand, as if trying to wave away my doubts. Jenny, you have done more in your short lifetime than most people do in 100 years. You've done more than any Musashi or Unity officer has ever done, or has been expected to do. Your experience is what makes you right for this office, not your rank. It is tradition, since Admiral Winters, the first Admiral, that the person who takes this office is someone who was born on Earth or on a Unity colony, but has been accepted as a Survey citizen and trained on Musashi. They are usually someone of exceptional intelligence and martial skill. You are the first person to fit that description that I've seen in many years, and the first one I felt who could handle the command. As far as the Dan testing is concerned, you will undertake the 9th Dan test as soon as possible. It will be similar to the first Dan test, as in you won't know when or where the test will take place. And if you pass it, no one on Musashi will question your fitness to lead, nor will any of the AIs. I looked at him and took in what he said. Me? Admiral? I was still unsure, and to move directly from 1st Dan to 9th was difficult to comprehend. Why not you? Said the Buddha. You have the skills to ensure that other people are saved from the new harmonists and other horrors of humanity. In this position, you can do much more about them than even you know. The Buddha's right. Why not me? I looked the Admiral in the eye. I'd be honored, sir. I accept. The Admiral smiled, then had a faraway look for a moment. Good. I've sent the message to Mia. Your test will take place soon, and when that is complete, you'll receive your enhancements. We will need to take a courier from here to Musashi, since Mia has been waiting just outside the space where the last rounds of Survey Unity negotiations will be taking place. You will assist me during the negotiations as part of your training. We will discuss the finer points during the trip. The negotiations are still a few months away, so we have time. Yes, sir. First, he said. The wall at the end of the table lit up with an androgynous avatar. Hello, Admiral. I see you have finally chosen your successor. Yes, first. This is Jenny Fraser, currently of the 1st Dan, soon, I believe, to be of the 9th. The Admiral winked at me. I almost laughed out loud at the Admiral's playfulness. I am formally naming her as my apprentice, with all the responsibilities of that office. Is Mia in agreement? They asked. Yes, first, the Admiral said. The Avatar turned to face me. Then I accept you as apprentice to the Admiral and my son's future Admiral, Jenny Fraser. I look forward to working with you. I stood up and bowed. Thank you, first. The first Avatar smiled. A demon from the Ares is docked and waiting for you. The rest of the negotiation team is already on board. Good luck with the negotiations, Admiral. Jenny? Thank you, first. We will do our best for Survey, the Admiral replied. The screen went off, and the older man stood, slowly. He reached across the table for his sword and belted it on. Come, Jenny. It's time to get to work. He grinned. But first, we need to get you a new sword. I grimaced, but the Admiral chuckled. Yes, sir, I said, and followed him. The first week on the Ares, I spent shadowing the Admiral and learning about the upcoming negotiations. There was a lot of conflict between Survey and Unity that stemmed from the very first treaty between Earth and Survey. What really surprised me was that Lulu wasn't kidding when she had mentioned that Survey was also a business. The original charter was for Survey Intragalactic, MC, and they owned a good amount of property and companies in Unity, particularly on Geneva Colony, as Survey was technically incorporated in the country of Switzerland on Earth. It wasn't widely known, of course, but I now had clearance to know just how vast Survey holdings were. The amount of information was overwhelming. It made me glad I was only assisting the Admiral. The only thing that was odd about the trip was that there was one man with blonde hair that paid nearly obsessive attention to the Admiral. At first, I thought he had some neurodivergence that made him seem intense, but after watching him with the others, I couldn't help but think that it was something more. Especially since he was also dismissive of the women on the team. When I asked around, I found out his name was Matt, he was from Lightbringer, and was a relatively new Survey citizen from Earth. That put my senses on high alert. During one of the sessions, the man started to look angry. We had been discussing the disposition of the new harmonists and Marsh's role in it. The man kept staring at anyone with dark skin as if they were something disgusting. He was sitting next to the Admiral, and I was on the other side. There was something about him I didn't like. He reminded me of some of the people I met on New Harmony. I was glad that Ares had been able to print me a replacement sword. One of the other aides was talking. We have to insist that Unity help with routing out the new harmonists that we haven't found yet. They're still wreaking havoc. A lot of the newer and outer colonies are still being influenced by their rhetoric. Matt scowled. Why bother with the outer colonies? Surely they should be able to govern themselves. What does it matter if these colonies lean conservative? The Admiral shook his head. Those colonies are still trying to run slaves and have either deadlocked or oppressive governments. There won't be any real progress if they're allowed to continue to act within Unity. No, the current government of Unity needs to take up the cause of cleaning its own house. We can only do so much. True, Matt said, his face twisting in anger. I think Survey has done enough. And before anyone could really react, the man pulled the Admiral out of his chair. You may have taken the Senate down, but we're still here, he said, putting the Admiral into a headlock and pulling out a knife. He pushed the knife against the Admiral's side. You want your precious Admiral to live? You'll stop coming after us. He really is a new Harmonist agent, I thought. My insides turned to ice. Why can't they just disappear? I pulled my sword. Everyone, get out, I said in a surprisingly calm voice. No one moved. Now, I barked. The other aides backed out of the room. I jumped on the table and moved towards the Admiral and Matt. You release the Admiral now, I said, sounding much steadier than I felt. Or what, you'll massacre me like you did the archpriests? Matt sneered, then moved into the corner of the room, using the Admiral like a shield. Terror filled me as my options for taking out this guy shrank. Yes, I said. The younger man seemed to realize that there was nowhere else to run. He dragged the Admiral fully into the corner with him, leaned into the wall, brought one foot up, and started pounding his other leg with it. Then he started to sing. Onward, Christian soldiers. I looked at the Admiral, who now had fear in his eyes. I remembered from Lucifer that the new Harmonist agents had explosives embedded in their legs. I didn't wait to find out, and my body reacted. Before he could get to the next line of the song, I jumped from the table and used my momentum to drive my sword through the Admiral and into the man behind him. Matt's eyes widened in surprise, and then his eyes rolled up, and the three of us fell into a heap on the floor. I rolled off them, then immediately went over to the Admiral. The older man was looking at me, but all I could see was my sword hilt sticking out of his chest. Admiral, I said, I'm so sorry. I couldn't let him blow up the ship. I felt tears well up in my eyes as I kneeled next to him. I know, he said. He went to move his arm. No, sir, don't move. I need to call the medics. I fumbled for my wrist comm, trying to find the panic button. No need for that, Jenny, he said, as he smiled, then took hold of the hilt and held it up. It was just a hilt, no sword. He let it go, and it floated in the air in front of him for a moment, then floated over to me. Take it, he said, and then help me up, please. I did as I was told. The Admiral looked at the man on the floor. Thank you, Matt, he said. Matt opened his eyes, smiled, and got up off the floor. It was then that I realized that there was no blood anywhere. Not on the floor, or on the men's clothing. I looked from the Admiral to Matt and back again. What? The Admiral nodded. If you would please give us the room, Matt. And please thank John Smith for letting me borrow you. My pleasure, Admiral. Matt turned to me. Congratulations. Remind me to never piss you off. He gave both of us a bow, then left the room. Privacy, please, Ares, the Admiral said. Yes, Admiral. And Ares left the room. The adrenaline in my body was starting to wear off. The Admiral just waited patiently, taking a seat at the table. I stared into the corner for a few moments more, as if reassuring myself that blood really wasn't spilled. I still held the hilt of my sword in my hand, which started to feel slightly heavy again. I looked down, and the blade was reforming. I waited until it was complete, then examined it. The blade felt solid when I touched it. I sheathed it and finally turned towards the Admiral. This was my test, I said, shaking. Yes, I am pleased to say you passed. Anger welled up in my chest. You forced me to kill you. Yes. Why? I demanded. We had to know if you would sacrifice someone important to you in order to do what was necessary. The unfortunate reality of being Admiral is sending people out to die. If you hadn't been able to do that, you wouldn't have been able to do the job, and I would be looking for another apprentice. The anger drained out of me. Suddenly, I felt very, very tired. I sat in the nearest chair to me. I didn't really think about it, sir. I just knew I couldn't let him blow up the ship. I knew what happened on Lightbringer. I could have hurt you badly, even with whatever my sword did. I didn't realize our swords could do that. It is something you would have learned about eventually as part of your officer training, but since you left for New York Colony right after your first AND test, there wasn't time to instruct you. The sword is made with programmable matter, and it can be retracted into the hilt. For the purposes of your test, Ares had control of the matter. There are touchpads on the hilt where the average soldier can retract the sword, but once you have your enhancements, you'll be able to control the sword with a thought. It's basically a glorified nanopicket, with a few more bells and whistles. It will be fitted with a jump drive once we return to Musashi, too, as part of your personal security. I blinked. That's useful. The picket functionality in programmable matter helps us avoid cutting up the bulkheads. I've never hit a bulkhead, sir, I said, feeling vaguely offended at the possibility. The Admiral just smiled. Of course not. I looked in the corner again, replaying the scene in my head. Who is Matt? He's a Sun Tzu agent, a specialist in routing out new harmonists. You will most likely meet him again, he replied. Hopefully not for a while. He was quite convincing. I took a deep breath. I could hate you for this, you know. I know. I finally looked at the Admiral and saw again how ashen his skin was. He also looked old. His hair had turned fully silver, which I hadn't noticed until now. There's something wrong with you, isn't there, sir? Yes, the Admiral sighed. During my first tour of duty in Unity Fleet, I worked as an EVA specialist. One time we were mapping a new system for a pre-call mission, and while we were close to the system's sun, I led an EVA team to do some repairs on a faulty sensor array in our ship. There was a solar flare, and all of us were exposed to a high level of radiation. I had to make sure everyone else got to safety, and I was the last into the ship. We were all treated for the radiation, but Unity medicine isn't as good as Survey's. It seems my body decided to betray me. I ended up with leukemia and was placed on medical discharge. The Unity doctors weren't optimistic, since the leukemia is particularly aggressive, but I wasn't about to give up that easy. I researched all the treatments I could find, and found out that Survey had a treatment regimen that was highly effective. I went to the nearest Survey office and demanded treatment. Much to my surprise, they agreed. I was first sent to Lightbringer. While I was still in the hospital, the Admiral at the time came to interview me. I didn't understand why he was talking to me, since I figured Admirals in Survey were just as important as the ones in Unity and didn't talk to lowly lieutenants. But during that conversation, he convinced me to come to Musashi once I was cleared to leave the hospital. The Admiral sighed again, slumping in his chair. When I came to Musashi, much like you, I found a culture that fit with my warrior nature and gave me a sense of peace that I'd never felt before. I moved up the ranks, and after I passed my own 9th Dan test, the Admiral made me his apprentice. It was around then that my leukemia came back. I received another round of treatment and was cleared for duty. Just after the old Admiral retired and I took over after being his apprentice for 10 years, the leukemia came back again. It was then that the doctors realized I had a relapsing remitting leukemia. They would treat me each time, but the time between treatments became shorter as I got older. This time, the leukemia isn't responding to treatment at all. You're dying? He nodded. I have chosen to stop all treatments except for pain management. I'm not sure how long I have, Jenny. It could be months, or it could be another year or two. I would wish that I would give you the 10 years that my predecessor did, but I don't think that's to be. I know, though, that I am choosing the right person to succeed me. I nodded. My anger completely left me while he was telling his story. Then we have a lot of work to do and not much time. Yes. I took a deep breath, trying to settle my mind, but it was difficult. I still don't feel really qualified for this, Admiral, I said. I knew I would do my best and learn as much from him as I could before he passed, but I feared it would not be enough. From what I saw today, you are more than qualified, Jenny, he said. Time will do the rest. I nodded, hoping he was right. Chapter 31. Marcus. Ugh, 24-hour days are weird, said Giannis, pinching the bridge of his nose with his left hand. Do you want to stop for the day? I asked. He started, but then stopped. You know, I was just going to say that I could work a bit more, but I think I really do need to stop. He sighed. Come for dinner? Yeah, that'd be great. Are you all settling in okay? Giannis nodded. For the most part. The twins are sad about having to leave all their friends behind, but have made some new friends at Sunny School. I think it helps that it's a small school. Nico thinks it's just a new adventure, although he misses the George. He always asks if he can ride on John's special ship again. I laughed. John might actually let him if he's around and doesn't have to be anywhere for a while. Really? I may have to ask him then. Giannis turned on his air chair and we walked out of Sun Tzu's computer lab. Have you heard from Jessica yet? Not yet, but her demon should be here any day now. It's kind of strange that she hasn't sent a message picket. I hope they're okay, Giannis said. I hope that Kai can forgive me. I put my hand on his shoulder. I hope so too. We walked the rest of the way to the Zimmerleys' quarters in silence, both of us lost in our own thoughts. Neither of us wanted to think the worst had happened, that one or both of them were dead. Giannis palmed open the door, and a little ball of energy barreled into me. Uncle Marka! Yelled Nico. Hey, kiddo, where are you going? I run! He yelled, then let go and ran in the opposite direction. We laughed as he zoomed across the living area of their suite. He disappeared down the hallway to the bedroom, screeching. Una was in the kitchen area putting up plates for dinner, and she winced. She turned and said, It was another kid's birthday at the infant school today, and it was a bit of a bash with cake, so Nico's been all wound up. I bet he'll crash soon. I smiled, and Giannis laughed. Giannis maneuvered his chair to his place at the table and parked it. I grabbed the plates from Una and finished setting them out. She nodded in thanks and went to get silverware and take food out of the printer. It's good to hear him laughing, I said, given all that you and all the kids have been through in the last week. Kids are sometimes a lot more resilient than adults, Una said. You all seem to be doing okay, I said. Una frowned. We're Genovians, Marcus, and from Schweiz. We're used to doing things on our own and relying on our family to get us through. We have each other, and that helps. She put the bowls of food on the table, then yelled, Dinner! The rest of the family came from all corners of the suite. Lena came with Nico and the twins. Ah, hello, Marcus, said Georg as we all sat down. Have you heard from your wife yet? Now, Papa, you know she's not really his wife, Yuri said. Oh, yes, right. So? I shook my head. Not yet, sir. She should be back any time now, though. He nodded as Ben handed him a plate of sausages. I thought she'd be back before us, the older man said. Well, the stealth demon is a much more powerful ship than the demon they'll be on. It has courier jump drives, so it has a much better jump range than the average demon. But it's still slower. Better than them drives your folks gave Fleet, Georg said. I started to reply, but he interrupted me. Now, don't get me wrong. It's well known that Survey keeps a lot of its highest tech away from Unity, and from what I've seen so far of it, I think it might be for the best. I tell you, though, fleet engineers have no love for Survey engineers when they come on board to fix the drives. I had to placate the engineers with Genovian chocolate half the time. What did you do in fleet? I asked. Supply corps, mostly on the big cruisers. Did some pre-call station supply, too. That's how I met Margaret. Margaret laughed. I was a fleet nurse on a pre-call station. In walks this pitiful Genovian man who forgot to hold on to the rails in the station core coming back from 0G. Broke his foot and got a concussion. Well, we patched him up, and he kept coming back to see me about little things. Took him a month to finally ask me out. George blushed, and we all laughed. Oh, but funny, Nico said, which made us all laugh again. It's kind of like how Yuri and I met, except I was on detachment to the Geneva colony base, and I had an old dog that wasn't doing well. Ben smiled at Yuri. I think you fell in love with my dog first. Yuri laughed. Hooch was a sweet old dog. Yeah, said Ben, I miss him. But he had a good life, although I think he made sure I was taken care of before he left us. Yuri and Ben gave each other such a look of love it squeezed my own heart. Reminded me of some of the looks that Levy had given me. My mind shied away from thinking about him. It was too raw still. I listened to the family talk as I ate, a little jealous of their closeness. My family on Whithaven thought I was dead now, but even then I was never this close to them. I sighed. Giannis heard me and asked quietly, You okay? I nodded, just remembering things. I looked at the others talking. I'm also a little jealous of your family. Where's your family? Giannis asked. Most of them are on Whithaven Colony, but, they think I'm dead. Oh, I'm sorry, Marcus. I hadn't realized the table had gone quiet. All the adults were looking at me. You all heard that? I asked. They nodded. I sighed again. This profession is not easy and doesn't lend itself to family. I felt a tug on my arm, and I looked down to see Nico and his George next to me. Hi, Nico, I said. Nico shoved his George in my lap. Here, you hug George, Uncle Marka. You feel better. I smiled, but my eyes teared up. Thank you, Nico, I said, and did as the toddler ordered. Nico nodded and climbed back into his chair and went back to eating. Everyone else was smiling, although the twins just looked at each other and rolled their eyes. When did I become Unca? Everyone laughed. He's been saying that since we got here, Lena said. I think he might see any adult who helps feed the Georges as uncle or aunt. He's been calling Jessica Auntie Jessa, too. She shrugged. Toddler logic. I hugged the George, which was soft, and Nico was right. I did start to feel better. So, how's the countermeasure search going? Asked Lena. Giannis and I groaned. Ugh, said Giannis. It's been difficult. None of the antivirus or even virus options work on the programming we have. The programming mutates really quickly. It runs one version of the code, makes more of itself, picks the ones that are strongest, and sends that off planet. It's not AI really, but it's supposed to learn and change itself. I think we're missing something in the original coding, or maybe even the interpreter. I still need to go over that, I said. Lena looked thoughtful for a moment. So, is it kind of like a bacteria or slime mold? Those can mutate pretty quickly, but act on their own, causing problems. I nodded. Yeah, that's one way to look at it. You know, in biochemistry, when we have a bacteria that gets out of hand, we generally use an antibiotic, but if that doesn't work, we genetically modify another version of the bacteria to compete with it. We make the new one the dominant species, and the old one eventually dies out. Can you make the equivalent of that to run against your program? Giannis and I stared at her. That's actually genius, I said. Yeah, we could do that, Giannis said. But what do we do with it after? Keep it a clock? Lena said. What do you mean? Asked Giannis. She held up her hand and pointed to it. Human cells have a DNA off switch called telomeres, which is why we age and why we can only culture regular mammalian cells so many times before the culture dies. So maybe you can give it the computer equivalent of telomeres. I think we could, said Giannis. Yes, I think that would work. We'd have to figure out how to distribute it. I think... The door chime interrupted Giannis. Una called out, "Come in!" John Smith and Lulu walked in, both with serious looks on their faces. Giannis moved his chair to see who had come in, and when he saw who it was, looked behind them for Kai. It was just the two of them. I knew what they were going to say. Oh, fuck, I thought. No, I whispered. Mr. Smith, said Georg, where's my son? I'm sorry, but your son is dead, said John bluntly. Silence descended on the family, the only noise coming from Nico trying to reach for food. Margaret started to cry and threw herself into Georg's arms. Ben took Yuri's hand. Una and Lena looked at each other, then to the twins, who were confused. Nico, sensing the adults' distress, stopped moving. Giannis's face was unreadable. How? Giannis managed to ask. John turned to Lulu, giving her a look. She nodded and took a deep breath and replied. He jumped off Piz Sherba. He managed to get up the mountain before me, and... Her face was a stony mask, and I knew that meant she was angry. I couldn't get to him in time. The Zimmerleys were staring at her in disbelief. I stood up, startling the others, and gave Nico his George back. The toddler took it and held it close. Uncle Kai gone? Asked Nico. Una scooped him out of the chair in tears. Yes, Nico. Uncle Kai is gone. Why? Nico looked up at his mother for an answer, but she couldn't give one. Lulu left the suite, and John waved me over to him. He took me aside and said quietly, I have the mental health team and some of the servants who specialize in grief coming to help them. Do you think they'll need anything else right now? I'm not good at this, and you've been with them the most. They're together, sir. That's the most important thing. Giannis will probably need some extra help, though, because he'll feel like it was his fault. John nodded. Will you stay with them until the team arrives? Yes, sir. I looked at the door. Will Lulu be okay? I've arranged things for her. I know what she needs, John said. I nodded. I have to go, said John. Make sure you take care of yourself, too. Yes, sir, I said absently as he left. I turned back to the family, who had moved to the living area to begin grieving in earnest. Giannis was the only one left at the table. At a loss, I started to pick up the dishes from the table, putting them in the recycler. When I finished, I sat down at the table next to Giannis. I killed him, he said. I didn't know what to say, so I didn't say anything. My fucking program killed him. And the last time I talked to him, I yelled at him. Giannis, don't try to tell me I didn't. Giannis snapped. I shook my head. No, I wasn't going to say that. I was going to say that we'll figure it out and destroy it. No matter how long it takes, we'll get it done. Giannis nodded, tears finally falling down his face. You have been listening to Tales from Flat Space. If you want to support me in my writing, there are many ways to do it. Share this podcast, follow me on my Twitch channel, or buy my books. All you have to do is go to revginapon.net and click on the relevant links. Thank you very much for listening, and I'll see you next time.